Hello, hockey fans, and welcome to McKeen's Hockey on YouTube. On today's video, we're going to talk about the newly released rankings and get a little more in depth as to how the rankings evolved. And this is more of a podcast style video, so no highlights or clips. And please subscribe and hit that like button. We'd really appreciate it. And I'll pass it over to Brock, Derek, and Josh.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, everybody. This is sort of our first run at this as a McKeen's team, and we felt that it was natural for the first one to be about our released top 64, and just kind of give everybody an opportunity to understand how we put our list together. We did give all of our scouts an opportunity to grade the players in their region that they felt were candidates for the top 64 this time around. Then we put that list together and came up with a top 64 that we were pretty comfortable with as a team. We wanted to get this list out before the World Juniors. Yes, there aren't a lot of players who make or have a significant impact at the World Juniors as draft eligible players, but it's only natural to get or want to know where players stand heading into that tournament. Then after the World Juniors, maybe towards the end of January, we're going to expand this list to a top 100. I think the most natural place to start here, and we were fairly unanimous as a group that Macklin Celebrini was the number one player available, is the number one player available. I personally don't know if that's going to change this year. It looks like he's got that pretty locked up. Why do you guys think that Macklin Celebrini is that sort of unanimous number one right now?
I would say that he's just such a complete, polished player. I mean, he's so responsible on every inch of the ice. He's a great two-way player. Like, he understands how to generate offense. He understands his responsibilities defensively. I'd say he's a guy who leans more offensive than defensive overall, but I don't think he's ever going to be someone that cheats defensively or, is a liability in that regard. And it's just so rare to see players who can generate this kind of offense at the NCAA level at his age. I mean, he's still 17. He's got 25 points in 15 games playing for Boston University, which is pretty remarkable. He's just so advanced in the way he thinks the game, the way he prepares himself, just the way he approaches the sport in general. He's, mature beyond his years. He's wise beyond his years. And he's just got a lot of skill in every kind of area. And he's a good skater, good passer, good shooter, with his shot maybe being his best physical asset. There's just so much to like. There's no real red flags. And maybe it helps him a little bit this year that I don't think there's anyone else who's really close. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that he's the best guy. And there's not really anyone nipping at his heels, which in some ways kind of puts him at the number one spot by default.
And I'll just piggyback off that. I think Derek nailed it. He's just so confident on the ice. You can see it when he drives the net consistently. He's so intelligent. He always seems to be in the right place at the right time. And those are the players that you're just so attracted to because they know where to be and when to be there. And I think that's key, that timing aspect. Derek mentioned the 25 points. That's currently third in the NCAA and first among all freshmen. And he's the youngest player in the league this year. And I think it's pretty remarkable that he's got 1.67 points per game right now. That's actually third all time for a U18 player. So what he's doing is pretty remarkable. And what I think my favorite thing about him is just how he drives play, and he really elevates the players around him. Everyone seems better when he's on the ice, and what we're seeing him do right now is pretty remarkable. Like Derek said, I don't think it's particularly close right now. There's a couple guys that might enter that conversation throughout the year. There's really not much to not like about his game. There are some times where he might look a little bit outmatched physically, but I mean, being the youngest guy in the NCAA, it's a pretty physical league. That's going to come. So it's not actually a red flag. It's something that's going to come with time.
Yeah, I know we had talked about this. For me, I just don't see anybody catching him for the first overall position. I think that he is the clear number one choice, and I don't see that changing this year. I don't see another prospect that has that same sort of star potential as Celebrini. I think that inevitably, when we look back on the 24 class 10 years down the road, we're going to have a couple other stars that come out of this draft class. It's going to happen. I just don't know who, or I don't feel comfortable saying who those other players are yet. Like, I see some projection concerns with a lot of the other guys that we're going to talk about in a second. I just don't see that with Celebrini. He just seems like a slam dunk to be a really impactful NHL player. And I guess the question that I have for both of you, and should we be tempering expectations for him at the World Juniors? I know that typically this is an event that draft eligible players struggle at, especially for Canada. The history for Canada and draft eligible players, it's not amazing. And I look at this Canadian roster that they're bringing to camp. I don't see a lot of dynamic offensive ability. I think this is a team that potentially could struggle to score a little bit. I think that's why they brought in maybe a few more role player types than they normally do. So I think normally we'd be having sort of this discussion about Celebrini being like, well, is he definitely going to be on the team? I think unquestionably I'd be shocked if he hadn't. I'd be shocked if he's not in the top 6 playing a really important offensive role. Am I crazy for thinking that, guys?
I don't think so. I think you look at that roster and it does make sense that he seems to be almost, I don't want to say a lock, but he seems like one of the best options. And it's hard because my instinct is to say to temper expectations. I mean, we just came off the Connor Bedard bonanza, right? With the excitement at the World Juniors. And Celebrini is not at that level. So I think we do need to temper expectations a little bit just based on what we've been used to in recent years. But I do think he could be a star on that team, just not at the Connor Bedard level that we've seen.
Yeah, I would say to maybe not expect Celebrini to be a star at this tournament, but also to not be surprised if he is, if that makes sense. I mean, just with the nature of this tournament and, how much skill is there at the under 20 level and just how young Celebrini is. I mean, I don't think it would be fair necessarily to expect him to be a superstar, but at the same time, he's always been exceeding expectations. He's always played at almost a level, a year above him. Whether he's playing at the U18 level as a 16-year-old, he looked phenomenal internationally. I mean, he was starring in the USHL as a 16-year-old. He's a year younger than almost everyone, at least in the NCAA right now, and he's one of the best players in the league. So he's always proven the ability to, punch above his weight class, as it were. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's able to do it again at the World Juniors. But if it doesn't happen, that's okay too. That's not a knock on him. That's not a knock on his long-term potential. It's more of a statement as to how good that tournament is.
Yeah, and it's definitely going to be really exciting to see sort of where he fits in that lineup. I think it's natural now to talk about the players that we have ranked right behind Celebrini, and this is where things got very interesting for us. We as a staff had trouble ranking these players. We had a very clear idea of the players that we wanted to rank 2 through 8. We do feel like there is a very separate tier here. That doesn't mean that that's going to be the case for the rest of the season or anything like that. But right now, we did feel like there was a very solid group here, 2 through 8. It was just finding that consensus on where those players should slot in. So for reference point, we have Sam Dickinson at number 2, Cayden Lindstrom at 3, Konsta Helenius at 4, Cole Eiserman at 5, Anton Silayev at 6, Ivan Demidov at 7, and Artyom Levshunov at 8. I guess I'll start in saying that I think part of the difficulty for myself in ranking these players is I don't necessarily know if I see a potential superstar, a potential star player in this group. I see a lot of guys that I think can be really solid NHL players, really solid, top 6 forwards, top 3 defenders. But I don't know if I see another player right now that has that sort of similar star quality to Celebrini, as I mentioned previously. I think, if I may, I'll start with the 3 defensemen. I think all 3 of them at times have struggled with their decision making with the puck. I do think that they're very different defenders, but I do think that that sort of questionable decision making, especially as they're trying to create offense, leads me to believe whether, as they move forward to that NHL level, if they're going to have to refine their games, and that ultimately sort of limits their upside a little bit. I look at Sam Dickinson as a perfect example. He's somebody that I felt coming into the year was definitely sort of that number two behind Celebrini, where we have him currently. And I know the rest of our staff did feel like Dickinson, or I shouldn't say the rest, but the majority of the rest of our staff did like Dickinson at number two. But the more that I've watched him this year, as he tries to push outside of his comfort zone, as he tries to, take more opportunity to jump up in the play offensively, to lead the rush, to try to create offense, there have been turnovers and issues with turnovers and decision making as he escapes his own blue line. When he's trying to make quick decisions and making quick exits, he's great, and he's probably the most polished defensively of these three, I would say. But is he really a potential number one or number two guy, or are we looking at more of like a solid number three guy? I mean, first, I guess it makes sense to ask you guys about these defensemen. Derek, where are you on these three defensemen? I know that you're probably a lot higher on Anton Silayev than some other people in our on our scouting team.
Yeah, I would say I'm pretty close on all three. Right now, I would feel comfortable having Dickinson a little higher. Personally, I might have him a tier above both Levshunov and Silayev, although I will admit they're all very, very close, and I think the order that I have them in could certainly switch around throughout the season. With Dickinson, I just find him to be the most well-rounded out of the three. I love the mobility of his skating. I love the fluidity of his puck movements. Levshunov has a lot of power to his game, really great north-south. Sometimes I find him a little clunky in his movements and the things he tries to do. It's certainly getting better, but sometimes I wonder, is it a skill issue? Is it just him, being so much bigger and stronger than a lot of guys that he can kind of just power through? Is that how he's gonna try to do things? I do really like Silayev just because he's such a rare kind of talent, right? I think you have to value Silayev high, because if a player like that hits, it's such a rare asset. To have a defenseman who's 6'6" or 6'7", who is a legitimately high-end skater, just the way he's able to take space away from other teams, the way he's able to create space for his team, it's so rare. And he loves to engage. He loves to be active. You'll watch him and he'll make an incredible play happen in the offensive zone, and then he'll immediately hustle back to the defensive zone and make something really, really good happen there. There's just so much potential with him. I know there are some risks about his decision-making and his awareness at times and his puck movement, and those are all very valid criticisms. But just the growth we've seen over him year to year, from last year to this year, is remarkable. He's getting a great opportunity where he is right now. He's playing under Igor Larionov as his head coach, one of the smartest players in NHL history. So I think his development's in really good hands. He's getting a ton of ice time already. So I feel pretty confident that some of the rougher parts of his game are going to get smoothed out over time. And I would say the same thing, too, about Dickinson. There are some question marks about his decision-making and his awareness at times. I find his consistency can really wane, but he's also playing for the London Knights. And, you have to give a lot of credit to their track record. You have to kind of factor that into the equation a little bit. It's not like he's playing on, the Niagara Ice Dogs, a team that's, gone through a lot of trouble. Like, London knows how to develop prospects, and they're already giving him a lot of opportunities. So he's going to get a chance to play through a lot of his mistakes. So I don't know. I feel pretty confident in all three guys. Like you said, Brock, maybe not to the point where they're true number one defensemen in the NHL, but I feel pretty confident in their overall upside to put them near the top of our draft list.
Yeah, and Josh, I think you raised a really good point in some of our discussions about these rankings, that I think we need to look at some of the errors that Silayev is making and remember that when we're comparing him to these other two defensemen, he's playing against grown men that have a ton of pro experience, and that has to be weighted appropriately, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say. His development curve has been rushed more than these other two guys have been. So he's in the KHL right now, and what he's doing is just unheard of. It's ridiculous, to be honest. He's already broken the U18 record for a defenseman in the league, which I think was only 3 or 4 points. And now he has tied the overall U18 record and the U19 record for a defender. When we look at just how he's kind of risen up and how he's impressed, I think that does need to be a consideration when we look at ranking him. And I think looking at all three of these guys, the decision making and the processing is probably I would argue the biggest issue for all three. And so it comes down to which, for the other players, what outweighs those risks. And Silayev, I think there's just so much potential there. Like Derek said, that package that he brings, it's almost unheard of. And so I think it's pretty exciting what he's doing in the KHL right now. He's kind of stalled a little bit in recent games in terms of that offensive, but it's nothing to worry about. I think even if he were to get no points for the rest of the year, the fact that he's playing significant minutes in that league, and that he is impacting the ice at both ends is nothing to scoff at. So it's an impressive season that he's having so far.
Yeah, and I mean, once we get past those three defensemen, there's a group of solid forwards, and I think it makes sense to talk about Helenius next, because I know you and Derek are kind of, I'm not going to say on opposite ends of the spectrum here, but that was one guy that does seem to be creating a bit of polarization at this point of the year in terms of his upside. Josh, you want to go first in talking about why I really like Helenius?
Yeah, for sure. So for me personally, I think he might be my favorite in the top 10. I do have him personally at second overall, just ahead of Dickinson. But all season, I think he's been outplaying his production. Looking at his stats, you're not really impressed, but he is owed more than that stat line shows. He's consistently making plays. And what I think is most impressive, similar to Silayev, is that he's playing in the Liga. He's playing in the top men's league in Finland. And he's the youngest player on the team. And everywhere he plays, he's always been the youngest player on the team. And he consistently excels to be a star in that team. I think we all know that it's always tough for a draft eligible to get top 6 minutes, let alone significant minutes at all in a men's league. And he's carved out a role in the top 6. I personally think he looks like an NHL centerman. He's strong in the dot. His defensive game is strong. His positioning is great. In the offensive zone, he's a strong playmaker. He creates space for himself with ease. And what I might like the most is his motor. He never gives up. He's highly competitive. He's hard on pucks. He's always the F1 leading the forecheck. And he can just make something happen every time he's on the ice. You almost see the pace of play pick up when he hops on the ice. In my mind, there's not a whole lot to like, but I do know that I think I was the highest on him in our scouting discussion. So maybe I'll see what Derek has to argue with.
Well, let me be clear. I do really, really like Helenius. I like him a lot. I've always had a very soft spot and highly prioritized guys with a high motor and a high pace. I think it's something that's so important at the NHL level. It's a grind in the pros. You have to be able to bring it every night on a consistent basis. And I think that's where a lot of players struggle once they, leave the junior ranks and turn pro. I'm not at all concerned about that with Helenius. His work ethic is through the roof. I just love his competitiveness, his drive. There's so many different things to like about his game. Where I start to have questions a little bit is just on the overall upside, I guess you could say, mostly on the offensive side. Like when I watch him now, he does generate a lot, but it's coming through his hard work. It's coming through his awareness, his decision-making, his timing. And those are all really good things. But once you get to the NHL level, those attributes aren't going to be as rare. They're going to be a lot more common. You're going to have a lot of guys who have the same level of awareness and drive And you're going to need to have a lot of pure skill to stand out and generate offense. Now, I'm not saying that Helenius is unskilled. He's not like a bottom six grinder or anything like that. I think he projects pretty well as, I would say, a second line forward at the NHL level, probably a second line center. I do think he has what it takes to stay down the middle, which is really important. But I don't know. I just don't know if I see a lot of high-end offensive upside. Someone who can kind of create enough space like that offensively. I kind of project him more as maybe like a 60-point center, second line center, who also helps out on the penalty kill, which is really good. I mean, I have all the time in the world for a guy like that. I guess coaches, wherever he ends up, are going to love him. I just wonder about the offensive upside a little bit. And it's not so much that I want to rank him lower. It's that I would probably put other guys higher, because I think in due time, they're going to pass him a little bit in terms of just overall impact that they bring to a team.
Yeah, and I mean, just to play devil's advocate for myself here, I guess for me, the issue is, as I've already mentioned, I'm not enamored with this draft class at the current moment. So I kind of see Helenius a little bit similar to you, Derek, but I value that pretty highly right now, because if he ends up being a 60-point centerman who can play in all situations, I think that's worthy of a top 5 pick in this draft, where there aren't a lot of players I see making a similar kind of impact in a lot of different areas across the ice. And I think that kind of is a natural segue to talking about the other two players within our 2 through 8, and that's Cole Eiserman and Ivan Demidov. And Demidov, obviously tons of skill, has had some injury issues this year, obviously not playing a ton in the KHL, so there is that component that makes it tough to evaluate him. In terms of Cole Eiserman is a guy that I'm finding myself having a hard time really loving this year. And I'll tell you why. I really liked his play last year, and I just don't know if I've seen any sort of improvement. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because Cole Eiserman was already a fantastic prospect last year, playing up with the U18s, showing a really great natural scoring ability, a lot of upside in terms of his scoring ability. But could you really say that he's better this year? Has his game really progressed? And you always kind of see that with these types of players, right, who have that natural scoring ability. We saw it with Cole Caulfield, right, where their games kind of become micromanaged. We kind of overanalyze based on the lack of development in other areas of their game. If Cole Eiserman ends up being, a consistent 35 goal scorer, who maybe doesn't bring a ton to the table otherwise, but is able to be a consistent goal scorer, that's probably worth a top 5, top 7 pick in this draft. But at the same time, watching some of his games this year, watching the recent Nations tournament, it just seems like there are other players who are stepping up on that, having a more consistent impact in a lot of areas across the ice. I look at his teammate like James Haggins. I think there's no doubt that Haggins has been better this year, and that's why he got an invite to the U.S. World Junior Camp, and Eiserman didn't. And I think he's unquestionably, in my opinion, looking like a better NHL prospect at this point. Obviously, his draft year is next year with that late birthday. But I'm having a hard time really loving Eiserman this year the way that I did last year, and it's making it sort of difficult for me to find a spot within our rankings in terms of where I would want him. Where are you guys kind of on Eiserman right now?
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. I was really hoping that he would be the star of that team, and I mean the 25 goals in 21 games. He's definitely able to score goals. There's no question of that. I was just hoping to see the rest of his game flush out a little bit more this season. And you're right. I just don't think we've seen that. He tends to get blinders on, and he just wants to score goals. He wants to try and do everything himself at times. And I was really hoping to see a little bit more of him being able to use his teammates. When he's able to use his teammates and kind of get those give and go plays, he'll be able to score more. And so by trying to do it all himself, often we see quite a few turnovers. So I do question if he'll be a bit more of a passenger in the NHL versus a play driver. And I think that's why we have him maybe a little bit lower than some others out there might have him. And I think you nailed it with James Higgins. I think he has really elevated his game, and the World Juniors invite is a good example of that. Where I was hoping that would be Eiserman. The offensive awareness is sky high. I think he's probably the best goal scorer in this class. But I was just hoping to see a little bit more from him, and that might be a symptom of having high expectations for him coming into the year and him not meeting those.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys on Eiserman. I think that just because there's such a premium on pure goal scoring ability, it's such a valuable trade at the NHL level. It's so hard to find. I think just because of that, we can't drop Eiserman too far, just because he's so good at that one specific area of the game, and it projects well. I think he's going to be a guy who scores 30 to 40 goals at the NHL level on a consistent basis. And, every team's going to want to find more guys who can do that. But yeah, I've also been a little disappointed from what I've seen in my viewings. He's a one-trick pony in a sense. I don't think he's necessarily terrible in the other aspects of his game. I wouldn't say they're red flags, but I would say that a lot of his other tools grade out at best as average, which is a little disappointing. In general, I'm a little disappointed with the NT-DP class this year overall. So maybe that's part of it too. But yeah, I don't know. I like where we have Eiserman now, and I'd be willing to bump him higher if I can see improvement in his game in other areas, just to make himself a little bit more of a diverse player. And I'm open-minded about where he can grow, whether that's as more of a two-way guy who's a little bit more responsible on the defensive side of the puck. I'd be welcome to see him, try to look for more passes, more plays in the offensive zone, as opposed to just, like Josh said, getting those horse blinders on and just looking for the shot. So I still like him, and I'm still, willing to, come back to him and think about bumping him up in the future. But I don't feel bad about us having him maybe a little bit lower than where he's been on other lists and stuff like that. And I'm also willing to maybe bump him a little bit lower if those areas of his game don't develop. But I'd be very hard pressed to see us bumping him all the way outside of the top 10, let's say, at any point this season.
Yeah, and speaking of bumping, I thought we would leave this player to the end for our discussion of our players ranked 2 through 8. It's Cayden Lindstrom. Obviously, he's a player who has risen significantly up, not just our rankings, but a lot of rankings across the different independent scouting agencies. Why? Obviously, he's in your region, Derek. Why is Lindstrom a player that is just so alluring?
Man, his trajectory this season has been phenomenal, and actually last season too. So Lindstrom wasn't a first round pick in his Bantam draft year. He also wasn't even a second round pick. Medicine Hat actually got him in the third round, which is kind of amazing. But I also look at it as him being a bit of a product of the chaos of the pandemic. Maybe he just wasn't in the right situation to kind of show his abilities in his Bantam draft year. But this is a guy who just has so much upside in all areas. He's a phenomenal athlete, a really big player, and he's just got tons of skill. Like when you watch him play, he just leaves such a tremendous impact on the game in so many different areas. He's a sublime skater, fantastic puck skill, a real physical presence who's not afraid to throw thunderous hits and, get his hands dirty. Like he doesn't back away from challenges. He'll wipe you out on the boards. He'll fight to get inside position around the net, but he's also got a ton of skill. And his vision and his awareness and his decision-making are all coming along really, really nicely as well. He's not just a guy who kind of tries to power forward and do everything himself. Like he's a guy who really does understand the play unfolding around him. He's able to make smart, subtle plays. And he's such a fascinating player to watch because on the same shift, 1 second, he'll just completely eliminate a player with a big hit and then pick up the puck and just fly down the ice, use razor sharp edge work to spin away from pressure and then make the softest pass you've seen all season to one of his teammates, all within seconds of each other. And the fact that he plays center, he's good in the dot. He looks like he's going to be a guy who can stay down the middle because he understands his defensive responsibilities well enough. I mean, I can't find anything about his game that I don't really, really like. He's a guy that I could see legitimately being a number one center in the NHL level, and a guy who can, bring a physical game and a soft skill game all at the same time. Now, I got to say, I'm maybe a little bit hesitant to put him too high. I think where we have him at 3 is good. But I think I just need to see a little bit more of him to really be certain that this isn't all a mirage or anything. Because what I've seen so far, it's been nothing but good. But I would say there's almost a little bit less of a sample size with him compared to some of the other top prospects who have been top prospects in their age group for longer. Lindstrom is so relatively new to the scene that maybe it makes me want to dial it back a little bit. But don't get me wrong, this is a guy who could potentially really cement himself as the number 2 prospect in this draft if he continues to play and develop at the pace that he has so far this season.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that people should know is that obviously with Lindstrom being ranked at number 3 by us, we're not as concerned about the lack of hockey IQ that I have seen come up as a bit of a narrative in social media, in some other scouting agencies' reports. If we're going to be ranking him that high, we obviously believe that there is an opportunity for him to sort of put everything together and get the best out of that really unique skill set, as you said, Derek. I guess the next thing we wanted to sort of do is we wanted to talk about a little bit more of a rapid fire sort of format, some players outside of our top 10 and players sort of on the fringes of our list, and just allow people to become a little bit more aware of our opinions on certain players. So first thing we want to talk about was some players that are not currently in our top 10, but we personally believe have an opportunity to sort of move up into that territory in the future. And I'll go first with Zeev Buium. I've been very impressed with his play at both ends. Obviously, he's producing a lot offensively as a freshman defender, right up there with Levshunov. The skating combination with the IQ is really good in my opinion, and I think that's led to a lot of really positive defensive plays. I do see some of the concern, and I'll let Derek sort of speak to that. I do see some of the concern about a lack of, maybe we'll call it, premium athletic tools. We've seen a lot of defenders with a similar sort of skill set have difficulty transitioning to the NHL level. And I know one guy that Derek brought up in our discussion was Ty Smith, and I do see some of that concern, but I just see Buium being such an intelligent player. I think that he can get the most out of that skill set.
He's another player that, like Helenius, I do like overall. It's just I might not like him or maybe believe in him quite as much as I do some of the other players in this draft class. I think this draft class does start to cluster a little bit in the 10 to 20 range. There are a handful of guys in there that I do like a lot, and I'm starting to grow on. And Buium is certainly in that conversation too. I don't know. I wonder about what his game is going to look like at the NHL level. We talked about Ty Smith as an example of a guy who, wasn't overly big, was a good skater, but not a great skater at the junior level. But, he had high-end offense. He had high-end hockey sense. But he wasn't quite able to translate his game to the NHL level. And maybe he still will. He's only, 22 or 23. He's playing in the AHL right now. There's still a chance he can get there. But I think he just hasn't quite panned out as well as most people thought he would. And I do wonder a little bit about that with Buium as well. And it's, Smith's not the only guy like that who hasn't quite panned out. So I don't know. With him, I think he's a good skater. I do really like the offense. I like the vision. I like the decisiveness. He's a player who wants to have the puck on his stick. He wants to make a difference, and he can usually see how to do it. But what's he going to be at the NHL level? Is he going to be able to quarterback a power play? Is he going to be a guy who's really, really reliable on breakouts and transition? Is he going to be a guy who can get defensive stops? Is he going to be able to separate opposing players from the puck in the defensive end? And I just have questions in all of those areas. I'm not super, super confident in his ability in any of those areas, which makes me wonder a little bit about his long-term upside. I see him maybe as a guy who's like a 4 or a 5 at the NHL level, which is, that's good enough to be in the first round, but I don't know how high I would want to take a guy like that.
Okay, so why don't we talk about your pick in this section, and that's Carter Yakemchuk. Why is he sort of your favorite, just knocking on that door of the top 10?
Yakemchuk is a wild ride, let me tell you. Like the Calgary Hitmen are not a particularly good team, and they haven't been since Yakemchuk came into the league. They really opened the door for someone on that team to step up and say, I'm going to lead this team. I'm going to be the guy. And Yakemchuk just burst through the door. He is about 6'2", 6'3", a right shot defenseman, and really, really good puck skill. Like his offensive sense, his ability to drive play are really remarkable. And it just seems like it kind of came out of nowhere. He's another guy who wasn't necessarily a high a bantam pick. I think he was a 3rd rounder. But just the growth he's been able to accomplish in the opportunity he's had is remarkable. He's just a guy where it almost seems like at times with the Hitmen, their whole strategy is just give Yakemchuk the puck and let him do his thing. And somehow it just keeps working. He's scoring at more than a point per game pace. And just the way he's able to create offense for himself and his team from the blue line in is pretty incredible. Like he's a legitimately high-end threat from the blue line in. He's a legitimately high-end threat as a power play quarterback. He can pass, he can shoot. He brings a pretty good physical element as well. He's not a bad skater. I wouldn't say he's a great skater, but he's certainly good enough. And he's able to weave through traffic. He's able to create a little bit of separation in a straight line. He's just a guy that I think a lot of teams will really, really value. I mean, you look back to last year, David Reinbacher went 5th overall to Montreal as a big toolsy right shot kind of defenseman. And Yakemchuk's really similar. And honestly, Yakemchuk might even be better at the same age than Reinbacher was, truthfully, just because he has way more offensive upside. He's still a bit of a wild card just because the Hitmen play so unstructured. I wonder what Yakemchuk's game is going to be like at the NHL level, where he doesn't have a constant green light to go and activate. He's going to have to really adjust his game for the pro levels, but he's just a really special talent. I mean, no matter how bad the Hitmen are, he's always out there every shift trying to make something happen. Like his drive is really, really good. Like he's a really special player. And I think a lot of teams are starting to realize just how rare he is for what he can bring and what he's doing.
Josh, why don't you take us through your player that's your favorite, knocking on the door of the top 10?
This was tough. There's a few guys in that range that I like, but I ultimately went with Emil Hemming, playing for TPS in the Liga this year. So I think he started off the year with a strong performance at the Hlinka Gretzky, 9 points in the 5 games, and he really hasn't looked back. He's proven too good for the U20 league, and he spent most of the season in the Liga, where his stats don't really stand out immensely. He's got 6 goals and 8 points in 25 games. But his minutes are kind of all over the place, like down at 6 minutes, up to 13, 14, 15. So I think if he were to be given some consistent time, we'd really see that production start to come. I almost see him as a Cayden Lindstrom 2.0. He's a little bit smaller. The ceiling maybe isn't as high, but I don't think it's that far off. I think his combination of size and skill is going to put him high on NHL teams' lists. He's fearless in his drive to the net. His eagerness on the forecheck, he's nonstop. I can just imagine how hard he is to play against. He has a really strong, powerful shot that he's got 2 of his goals came in the last 3 Liga games. He's truly stood out, where we can really see his success is against his peers. So last season at the under 17 challenge, he had a point per game, helped Finland to a bronze medal. This year at the Helenka, he was arguably one of the best players on the team. And there's a chance that he's on the U20 team for Finland. That selection camp roster hasn't come out yet, but there's a chance that he's on there. And he could be a contributor. I think he consistently plays above his age class, and there's not a lot to not like. I think you might question some of the defensive zone coverage, but again, like some of the other guys we talked about playing in men's league, his development's been pretty rushed. Last season, he played mainly in the U20 league, but he was only 16, 17 years old. He's consistently playing above his age class. He looks more mature. He's still just 17. So there's a lot to like here. I think he is knocking on the door. He's maybe doesn't have that ceiling that some of those guys in the 2 to 8 range that we talked about, but in the 9-10, I think he could get some conversation there from our scouts later this year.
And from one Finnish player to another, the next segment we want to talk about was players that we feel have been a bit of a disappointment this year and maybe are starting to possibly fall out of the first round, or there's that possibility that they fall out of the first round. And obviously, with the segue being, we're continuing to talk about Finnish players. Aron Kiviharju, and I know that both of you wanted to talk about him in this segment. Derek, why don't you go first? Why is he somebody that comes to mind for this segment?
Yeah, it's not so much that Kiviharju has gotten worse as a prospect. I mean, he's a guy who's been on the radar for a while now. Like a really, really advanced player for his age as a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old coming up through the Finnish ranks. We saw him a lot at the international level. He played with men last year a little bit. Like he's a guy who's been around for a while, but I find his development slowing, and I just don't know where it's going to go from here. He is a smaller defenseman. He's a good skater, but not a great skater. I like his offensive game, but I don't love it. And I just wonder what he's going to be like at the NHL level. He played a little bit this year in the Liga before getting hurt. I watched a couple of his games. He picked up a couple points, and he didn't look bad. It's just I feel like other defensemen and other prospects in general are starting to pass him and project a little more highly. He reminds me of a guy from my region a couple of years ago, Carson Lambos. So Lambos came into his draft year, projected as a possible top 10 pick because he had advanced hockey sense, advanced maturity. Like he was just a really solid, well-rounded defenseman coming up through the WHL ranks. But his development just kind of seemed to slow down, and it just never really took off, and other guys passed him. He slid down the draft boards. He got picked in the late first round in his draft year. And, so far in the AHL, he's just been okay. And that's kind of where I worry about Kiviharju going. When I'm trying to envision what he's going to be like in the NHL level, I don't know if I see a guy who can quarterback a power play. I see a guy who's probably going to have trouble getting stops in the defensive end, either through his strength or his ability to gap up. And I don't know if he's a high-end skater or an elusive enough skater to be a real asset in transition with breakouts and entries. So I don't know. I just worry about where his game is going. It's unfortunate that he's injured because he's a guy that I need to watch a lot more of just to really confirm some of the concerns I have, or hopefully not be as concerned because I want him to succeed. I don't want him to be a bad prospect. But I don't know. I think he's slowing a little bit. I think other guys are passing him, and I think it's going to hurt his draft stock, possibly to the point where he goes all the way outside the first round.
And I'll just piggyback off that too. I think you nailed it, and I like the Lambos comparison. I think that's a good point. I was thinking of Atu Radi. So he came into his draft class as the first overall, and he slid all the way to the second round. I think we might be seeing something similar with Kiviharju. I think whether his development has stalled, and it may be because of how fast his development did have to excel over the years, or perhaps it's because of that, the pressure is just maybe a little bit overwhelming. Either one makes sense. These are young kids we're talking about, right? So he has kind of stalled out this year, and I think that injury, he's out for 4 months right now. That's going to hurt him. And just because we're going to see other players really establish themselves, and it's nothing against Kiviharju, but they will likely just bump him down the list further and further. I think that Derek kind of nailed it, but I'll just add that he's just extremely inconsistent in his own end, often getting beat, often kind of making mistakes. And I think that is another thing that we were hoping to see improve this year, and now not getting a chance to see that. He's going to miss out on the World Juniors. He's going to really need to pick up when he gets back and see that ceiling that we kind of hoped for coming into the year. He still has a chance to rise up, but right now I think there is a risk. There's also his size that is going to be a consideration, 5'10", 165 pounds. We call that undersized, call that my exact measurements. But he still has the ceiling, in my opinion. I think the floor is just quite a bit lower due to that inconsistency and the risks that are attached to him. So he could stay where he is on our ranking. He could rise up, or he is at risk of falling out of that 32.
I pick for this segment as another European defender, and that's Adam Jiricek. I'm having trouble this year kind of determining what kind of player he is. And maybe I'm sort of unfairly comparing him to his brother, but I just look at the development of his offensive game this year, and I think it's kind of stalled a little bit. I don't think that he's taken that jump as a skill player that I expected him to. Obviously, the playing environment is tough playing against men in certain situations like he has. But at the same time, I just wonder, when we're comparing him to some of the other players, some of the other really good toolsy defenders available, we mentioned Carter Yakemchuk earlier, right? There are other players in that range that I think are starting to sort of separate themselves, and I don't know if Adam Jiricek is. And for me, I think he's somebody that sort of belongs in that back half of the first round, even maybe pushing out of it as we move forward in the year, if his game doesn't really find a consistent high level. And I worry sort of about that upside. I worry that he's more of maybe like a Dmitry Kulikov type at the NHL level. That's fine. A really good long-time pro, but maybe not more than like a number 5 guy on a really good team. And when you look at some of the other defenders available in that area, I just wonder if there are other choices that are better. He's just somebody that hasn't wowed me this year in the way that I expected him to. I think that it's great to now segue to our next segment, and that is our favorite player currently ranked outside of our first round at McKeen's. Obviously, if you want to check out the full list, we are going to have that out as part of our new YouTube channel. We're going to have it out in social media. We'll have it on the website. But we just wanted to highlight some of the players that we personally really like and would advocate for being higher, but it just didn't work out this way. Obviously, everybody's going to have their favorites. Josh, why don't you go first? Who's your favorite player outside of the first round currently in our rankings?
For sure. So I picked Daniil Ustinkov, who we have down at 45. I think to start off, we've talked about the European men's leagues already, but I think there's some that are undervalued. Czech League, the Swiss National League come to mind right away in that regard. While Ustinkov's numbers don't pop off the page, he's getting pretty significant inconsistent minutes with the Lions right now, down at 3 or 4 minutes, and that could go up to 18. So he's kind of all over the place with how he gets gets used. But what I like about him is that he's got an August birthday. He's one of the younger players in this class, and he's always been playing above his age class. And his processing and decision making, I find pretty regularly on point. He doesn't turn over the puck a lot. He plays with a level of patience and calmness that is pretty impressive for a young player playing at that level. It really impresses me. And for defenders, especially young guys, you often see them forget to scan the ice. They pick up the puck, they don't look where they're going, they don't know their next step. It's almost second nature to him, where he always seems to know where everyone is on the ice. He's checking before he picks up the puck, he checks after, so he always knows where his next move is. He has the ability to lead the rush. He drives the play from the back end. He shows off elusiveness to break away from attackers. He can pull them in and then create some space for himself. He's also shown a strong ability to disrupt plays in the defensive zone. He's got a very active stick, strong positioning. There are times where I'd like him to make a decision a little faster. That patience gets a little overwhelming for him, it seems. And there is some playmaking inconsistencies, but I think the overall package is pretty exciting. He should be a star at the World Juniors later this month. He stood out at the U18s last year, at the Hlinka this summer. Now he'll be with the U20 squad, and I think he'll be a star on that Swiss team.
Yeah, and my choice is another defender. It's EJ Emery from the U.S. National Development Team program. I see a player that just has some really unique tools, and I think that gives him a very wide variety of outcomes in terms of projection. And I don't really know what that finished product is going to look like. And I think that's part of the allure. With Emery, when you watch him, he's somebody that's improved a lot. I think between the last year or so, we're seeing him become a little bit more confident as a defensive player, which is great because he has that really high-end mobility with the size and reach. It gives him really good upside as a defensive player at the NHL level, kind of like a Brandon Carlo type. Offensively, we see flashes. And I can't help but think of watching a guy like Keandre Miller, where there was consistency issues, but that upside just kind of flashed through from time to time. And it made you wonder what he was going to be as a polished, finished product. And I'm just really excited to see how Emery looks as the year progresses and as we sort of move forward towards the pinnacle of evaluating the National Development Team program, and that's the U18. But I just really want to see how his game develops this year. I think he's somebody that, of the players that were knocking on the door for us outside of the first round, he's somebody that I find to be the most interesting and somebody that I think NHL teams are really going to love because of that upside at the very least as a really strong Brandon Carlo type defensive player. Derek, who's your pick?
Yeah, I would have to go with Andrew Basha for this category. And I still don't know if Basha is a guy that I could see feeling comfortable taking in the first round. I don't know if he's necessarily knocking on the door, but as a favorite guy outside of the first round, I mean, I'm a big fan. He's really, really winning me over the more I watch him. He just plays so fast and so confidently and just flashes really, really interesting skill at different points. It's not consistent, which is part of the problem, but it seems like once every game or once every couple of games, he'll just make something completely incredible happen out of nothing. He's got a great pace. He's very confident with the puck on his stick, and he can make quick plays in small areas. Even at full speed, like he'll look like he'll be trapped somewhere, or he doesn't have space to make a play, and he'll suddenly pull a puck through defenseman's skates, take a couple of steps, and he's gone away to the races, in for an odd man rush. There's also just a lot of well-rounded attributes to his game. He doesn't cheat defensively. He puts in a great effort. He plays with a lot of pace. He's kind of like a spark plug out there for Medicine Hat. He's not the biggest guy, but he's not afraid to, go into traffic. He doesn't shy away from trying to get to the net. He's just a very entertaining player to watch. And I think he's a guy who understands what it's going to take with his skill set to be successful in the NHL level. I'd project him probably as more of a second line player at his peak, but I think he's going to be a guy who figures it out. He's just so smart, and he thinks really quickly on the ice. And I think he's going to be a guy who figures it out one way or the other and has enough skill to kind of help elevate his game at times, and probably keep him outside of a bottom six role. But even if he did end up in a bottom six role, I feel like he could figure it out in some way or another there as well. He's just a high energy guy, high character, with not consistent skill, but enough skill to make something happen every now and again.
All right. And the last segment that we wanted to chat about was our favorite player outside of the top 64 currently at McKeen's. A player that we feel like can make a very serious push up the rankings in the second half of the year. And I'm going to go first with a player that is from my region in Ontario, and that's Gabriel Frasca of the Kingston Frontenacs. He's somebody who's missed the start of the season with a shoulder injury. I think that if he wasn't injured, he would have had a good chance of being on the Canadian Hlinka Gretzky team. Has just recently started playing again in the OHL and has looked really, really good in his first couple games back. Honestly, hasn't even missed a beat. His two older brothers have been longtime OHL players, were longtime OHL players, but they weren't the same caliber. And that's no offense to them, to Jordan and Jacob, but Gabriel is on another level compared to his brothers, in my opinion. He's somebody who is just a really solid overall centerman, really good hockey IQ, good at both ends of the ice, has a great shot, has good size and puck protection ability, a good skater, definitely not a great skater. That's going to be something that's going to have to be focused on. But I think a better skater than his brothers were at the same age. And I've seen a couple of his games already since he's returned from injury, and I've been really, really impressed. He's been one of the best players on the ice in the games that I've watched. And I think that if he continues to play this well and even maybe elevates his game even further as he becomes more comfortable, gets sort of his conditioning back, this is somebody that I think can make a serious push, not only for, the top 64, but maybe even our top 40. I think that the OHL, it's not an incredibly strong group this year. I know that our other Ontario scout, Chase Rochon, has talked to a few scouts recently who've told him that they feel it's the worst group in Ontario that they've ever seen. I wouldn't go that far, and I know I've talked to a few people who don't like the draft prop, but maybe don't see it at that sort of level of poorness, we'll call it. But to me, Gabriel Frasca stands out as a player that I think, based on his injury issues to start the year, I think he's something that can make a really strong push. Derek, who's your player?
Yeah, my player isn't someone from my region. It's actually Spencer Gill from Rimouski in the QMJHL. He's a player that I noticed at first watching highlights from the Q, and I just was so intrigued that I had to go and get some video views in on him to watch a couple full games. And I just like what he brings overall. He's a rangy, toolsy kind of defenseman. He's a bigger guy with good mobility and reach for his size. You mentioned Brandon Carlo earlier when you're talking about EJ Emery, and I see a lot of that as well in Gill. He's a guy who projects well as a defensive defenseman at the NHL level in a modern sense. So he's a guy who can gap well. He can take away space with his lateral mobility and his reach. But he's also a guy who's not afraid of the physical side of the game. He knows how to pin players to the boards. He can clear the front of the net. He's not afraid to bring a bit of a physical element to lay a bit of punishment. But he's also a guy who's trying to do things outside of his own end as well. So he's not a really prolific point getter or anything like that, but I like how he activates on the rush. I saw a lot of plays so far where he'll just activate, make himself an option, skate hard to the net on the rush. And even though he's not touching the puck, he's still making things happen. He's still creating a little bit of space. He's forcing the opposing defenseman to have to, watch him or maybe drift a little bit to cover him. And then he'll quickly get back to the defensive end. So he's a guy who's trying to make a bit of an impact in all three zones. He's got some hiccups with his puck skill. That's undeniable, but he's a pretty solid passer. He makes a really strong outlet pass, hard tape to tape from his end, much further up the ice. So he's a guy that is not quite all there yet. He's still very much a work in progress, but I see just a lot of room for growth to his game. I think the foundation is really there. He's doing the right things. I think he's thinking the game well enough to play the kind of style that he plays. He's just someone that I see growing a lot and growing pretty consistently for the type of defenseman that he is. And just because guys like him are such a premium in the NHL, I think teams are going to value him a lot and give him a lot of really good opportunity to develop and grow. They're going to prioritize helping him develop and grow. So I think he's going to be a guy that might not, be flashy right now or exciting or draw a lot of attention, but I think he's going to be a guy who finds a way to carve out a long-time role at the NHL level.
And Josh, your pick is actually a very interesting one. If you follow my work or followed my work for a really long time, not just for McKeen's, but outside of McKeen's, one area that I'm always fascinated in is those players that are second or third year eligible. And in your pick, Josh, is one of those types.
Yeah, I went back and forth on which player I was going to talk about, and ultimately I decided to go way off the board. And Jesse Pulkkinen. If you can't tell, I put a bit of a focus on Finland in recent viewings. But so Pulkkinen was eligible last year, was passed over. I don't think he was actually on any public lists, but he's really stepped it forward this year. He recently just broke into the Liga with JYP, playing in his first 3 games. And just to kind of give you a look into what he's done, he started out with 18 minutes per game, and in his 3 games, he's put up 16 shots. So there's something to like here. He stood out in the U20 league before that. He put up 28 points in just 18 games, and he's a defender. That's 11 goals and 17 assists. It looks like he might fit into the World Juniors roster. Again, we haven't seen that selection camp roster come out yet, but I think there's a good chance. The frame that he brings is similar to Anton Silayev. He's 6'6", 203 pounds, so a little bit smaller, but that frame is pretty similar. And while Silayev has had his development rushed to the KHL, Pulkkinen has had a little bit of a slower push forward. So he's really had a chance to kind of fit into each level and get settled. He brings a physical presence. He has an excellent reach, obviously, with that 6'6" frame. And he's shown a promising jump in the offensive ability this season. Obviously, you expect that when they're an overager, but I think the level that he has moved that forward should really nudge the bar forward. He's not afraid to jump up in the zone, act as a fourth forward. He shows creativity as he drives to the net. He's not afraid to take advantage of space, and I mentioned that 16 shots in 3 Liga games so far. There is some risk. He can take too many chances on his own, where he turns the puck over. I think he can lean into utilizing his size a little bit more. But just like we talked about with Silayev, I think there's a really intriguing package here that NHL teams will like. I don't think he gets passed over again, whether that's within the top 64 or maybe a third, fourth rounder. There's some potential here. And I do just have to give shout out to one other player that I considered mentioning. That's Cole Davis in the OHL. So Brock, I'm sure you have a better understanding of him than I do at this point, but as a rookie in the OHL, he's really caught my eye early. So I just wanted to flag him as well.
Yeah, Davis is actually a very interesting player. He has been very impressive for a struggling Windsor team. And I think at the beginning of the year, I didn't really know whether this was somebody who was going to be an NHL draft prospect or just somebody that was going to end up being a really solid OHL player. He brought a lot of energy, good skater, not a big kid by any means, but a very tenacious player, very, very high energy, we'll call him. And I think seeing a lot of development on the offensive side of things for him, where he's starting to become more of a play driver. And we're not going to toss out the name as a strict comparison here, but Easton Cowan had a similar sort of progression last year as an OHL rookie, and that at the beginning of the year he was kind of somebody that was only really responsible as a support player, and then as the year progressed, he kind of became the focal point of his line. And I don't think we've necessarily reached that level with Cole Davis yet, but I will agree, Josh, he's somebody that I think is impressing me more and more with every passing month, to the point where I would probably pretty comfortably have him in sort of like the top 4 rounds now. And as the year goes on, it'll be interesting to see, how his game progresses further. So it's interesting that you brought that name up. That pretty much brings it to an end for us today. We wanted to just give you guys a little bit of a snippet on how our rankings came together and some of our opinions on the players eligible this year. This is going to kind of be a semi-regular thing now moving forward, that we have our own YouTube channel and kind of give everybody a peek through the window of the McKeen's thought process. And I really want to thank everybody for joining us, and continue to follow along. Please subscribe to the new YouTube channel, subscribe to all of our individual Twitter feeds, the McKeen's Twitter feed, X feed. I think all of us still make that mistake. And who knows what inclination it takes in the next little bit. But yeah, thanks for following along, and until next time.